Hello and welcome to the local airspace briefing at Lasham. Whether you're a new pilot or an experienced pilot, the airspace around Lasham is very complex and sometimes confusing, so we produced this video to enable you to understand a little bit more about what happens very close to us. This video is current as of March 2021 and is split up into two parts. First part is a central viewing for all parties, where we go through the basics of where the airspace is, how it operates, and what the rules are. The second part of the video goes into detail a little bit more about how gliders might be able to use the airspace if you're suitably qualified. Before you fly from Lasham, you may be asked a few basic questions about where the airspace is and what rules there are. So it's important maybe that you take some notes down during the briefing, and you can always play this back and it's available on the YouTube channel at any point. If you have any comments or questions about the briefing, please contact one of the flying staff. But for now, we're going to join the briefing that was recorded in March 2021.
Okay, so we'll make a start. So, as the airspace was due to come in, and it came in February 2020, we mandated and continue to mandate some equipment and some briefings for all gliders and all pilots flying at Lasham. That's first of all a radio. In this day and age with gliding, I think we do need to have the ability to at least be able to talk to somebody. Doesn't mean we need to be talking on the radio all the time. It just means that we've got an ability to, given the fact we've got jets on the airfields and the very busy airspace we live in, and also more people are getting radio licenses. So to have a radio, even if it's handheld in the glider, is a must these days. Moving map. CAA are very clear now that this is the best way in order to avoid an airspace infringement. And we certainly do have some complex airspace, not just near us, but elsewhere around our task area. So a moving map is also very useful. And of course, a FLARM. It doesn't go much to say that FLARM's been an absolute lifesaver over the last decade or two, and has been a big difference when it comes to the mid-air collision statistics. And linked to that, everybody has a mandatory airspace briefing. I appreciate they're not the most interesting thing to do on a Friday evening or a Saturday evening, but it's something that just gets out of the way, and it just means you have the right level of knowledge so that if there's an infringement or if there's any issues, at least you've had some sort of briefing. So a couple of definitions to go through. Qualified pilots, anybody with a bronze cross-country endorsement, anybody bronze C pre-1994 and a silver distance, or now with a sailplane flight crew license, a blue book, a bit like if I use my little laser pointer, a bit like this this thing here, which more of you will be seeing later this year. We will be doing a bit more information about sailplane licensing as we get closer to the transition date, which is the 8th of December 2021. Exciting. Student pilots are anybody that are not linked to that. So anybody who has not got that in the training system at the moment, if you've just got a bronze at the moment, that still means you're a student pilot until you get the cross-country endorsement. Anybody who's a student is obviously under the supervision of instructor. Yes, you might be off daily checks, but it does mean that somebody has taken responsibility for briefing you and giving you an idea of what the weather is and what you should be doing today. Now, that's quite important because when it comes to infringing the airspace or any mistakes while flying the airplane, potentially you get to a situation where the instructor will be called into question as well if the student is flying solo, whilst if you're a qualified pilot, Colin or myself or any other instructors won't be brought into the mix when it comes to it. I can see a question. Kay says, your sound is cutting in and out for me, Jordan. Can everybody else hear you? Everybody else hear me? You can use the, there's probably a hand or smiley face, something like that. Yeah, lovely. Look at that, lovely. Oh, wow, look at that. That does work. Okay, everything's fine. Sorry, Kay. I imagine it might be your internet down in that very beautiful part of the world. Excellent. So we've got those two definitions together: qualified pilots, student pilots. Okay, lovely. Let's check. Okay, let's just make sure I've answered that. Okay. Next slide. Okay, so if you are a pre-licensed pilot, so you're not qualified, we mandate the following things. You must have passed the bronze L or paper before solo. If you did happen to pass it, let's say the old white card paper back in 2018, 2019, that still counts as well. But anybody now coming through the system does the bronze L or paper, and all instructors know where that is. That is kept in the flying office under lock and key, but we can make sure that that is available to you when your student requires it. We also mandate a fault flight to see where the airspace boundaries are. That's quite useful because you can see exactly where the ground features are, which I'm going to come on to in a moment. Also, it allows you to have a go at the moving map. All of our club gliders have the UDIs fitted, and we have a little bit of a chat about the UDI and what changes have happened for 2021 to them. But yeah, an idea of how to use them, because they're not exactly the simplest piece of kit if you've never used one before. And all pre-licensed pilots should avoid controlled airspace by suitable margins. So not sort of sitting 100 meters away from it, just giving it that margin and that buffer zone, which I'm going to talk about in a moment. Very useful tool. Version 3 is now out of the Skyway code. That's on the CAA website. You can find it via Google. Very useful book. Has all of air law, has all of useful stuff about flight planning, everything, and it's written in a very easy readable format. So as version 3 is now out, I suggest everybody downloads that at some point, has a quick read through. It's got some really nice content. Right, on to the nitty-gritty stuff. So everybody can see us. I'll get my proper laser pointer now. There we go. So everybody can see us. This is using Sky Demon. This is based on the chart we had for 2020. Not much has really changed in this area for 2021. So we've got Lasham here. Directly above us is the London Terminal Manoeuvring Area. That is from 5,500 feet above sea level. Now, today you're going to hear a lot of different sort of discussions about height, altitude, airspace. 99% of the time in what we're dealing with is altitude. So it's above mean sea level. There's some really good presentations in Michael Harrison's Air Law video available on YouTube about sort of the differences. There's also a bit of meteorology, which I did for the BGA earlier this year. So I won't go into too much detail about the concepts. There are videos to have a look at if you are unsure, or ask an instructor. So 5,500 feet above us, that did not change at all. To the west of us, this area here is always a little bit higher. I know there's flight level 65 area out here. Of course, flight levels meaning that once you get towards the altitude, you need to make sure that you're on standard atmospheric pressure, 1013 hectopascals. Out further to the west, it goes up even higher, but we'll focus today on what's very, very close to us. To the north of us, out towards sort of the Aldermaston and Bergfield zones, this area here, that used to be a little bit higher, but this is all now 4,500 feet that you can see around this area here. So it doesn't take you much to go north of Basingstoke, and you've got a bit more of a lid on top. So be aware of that, especially if you're sort of final gliding through there and trying to stay high, maybe from a sea breeze front or something. Down to the south, we have the transponder mandatory zone, which belongs to Farnborough. That's CTA 8, and that's Class E. We're going to talk about these in a bit more detail in a moment. The Class D airspace of Southampton, that's been there for many years now, hasn't changed size at all, but still people do infringe the airspace, so worth being aware of that. And of course, the big lump of Farnborough airspace out to our east, and you can see how close we are here with the curve. And there's not particularly many line features, but we're going to try and establish them today. Out down here, mostly the same. There is this area here, which is the CTA 9, another Class C box. That goes from 5,500 feet above sea level to flight level 65. And of course, if atmospheric pressure is low, then the top of that box would come down. If atmospheric pressure is high, the top of the box would go up. So the amount of space, again, look at air law and you can have a chat to me about it. Not many people are using this box, but again, there is some things to be aware of there. There is this little triangle in the middle here, which doesn't quite link up to anything. That is sort of all go really. So you'll see on your airspace maps that you can still go to whatever the TMA level is above there, which I think it's 4,500 there above sea level. So yeah, interesting that happened. So that is the general layout of the airspace. We're now going to zoom in. Ooh, sorry, go back one. Okay, so got Lasham here, Alton down here, Basingstoke's just off the top of the map. So first of all, CTA 3, which just slides over the top of Odium. That's from 2000 QNH. And and 1300 foot QFE. That area, again, Class D, we'll come on to the classes in a minute, but effectively, if you think how low that is and you're that distance away from the airfield, you're very unlikely to actually end up wanting to soar underneath that. CTA 6, 1800 feet QFE above height, or 2,500 feet above mean sea level. And CTA 8, which is Class E, 4,500 feet QNH, or 3,800 feet QFE. So, but yeah, that's the general layout. Class E to the south, Class D just to our east, and Class G everywhere else you see here. Let's zoom in a little bit more. Okay, so this is from an OS map. You can see Lasham here. We can see the road that goes all the way down towards the Golden Pots, and the road that goes down to Odium and up to Odium and down towards Alton. The Golden Pot is in the centre here. Not actually called the Golden Pot anymore. It's the Turkish Bazaar or whatever it's called. Apparently a good restaurant. They've been doing quite well, actually, it seems. But yeah, we've put in this buffer zone for the pre-licensed pilots, generally when we're operating in an easterly. And we've tried to do that using the line features where possible. Those line features are, you've got the main Humbley Grove gasworks just in the northeast corner of the airfield. But there's another set of gasworks, very small in a wooded area, just to the northeast of the big one. That marks the northern edge of the buffer zone. You can see as we come down the buffer zone, we then come down to the Golden Pot. Notice that it's this area up here that is the biggest risk of infringement, because it just sticks out enough that it causes us a problem. It's less than sort of 3 miles away from the airfield. The buffer zone gets to the Golden Pots, and then it goes all the way down into Alton, and it sort of straddles between the old Odium roads and the new Odium road, which is the one that everybody drives on quite fast and doesn't look at the Golden Pot for who's turning out the junction. But yeah, so you've got the 2 roads there, and this sort of red line in the sand, it divides that buffer zone. So it gives you a reasonable amount of room if you are a student pilot. Within this zone, you're likely to get airspace warnings, so it's not as if you would trip over and you would immediately find yourself in the airspace, but you don't have much time to avoid the airspace here. And if Farnborough are on an easterly runway, they don't have much time to react if you infringe. So yeah, keep that in mind. Yeah, we have diagrams in the gliders of where this is, and instructors should be briefing their students to point that out as well. And we show that on the airspace briefing flight too. But yeah, it's not an absolute hard line. If you get 1 meter over it, it's not the same as infringing the airspace, but we obviously do keep a track of where the gliders go. Also of note, the ATZ at Odium, often forgotten these days, does go up to 2,400 feet above sea level. And it sort of just sticks out the edge here, just out the side of the Farnborough zone. So just be aware if you are soaring just near Weston Patrick or Upton Gray, that you don't sort of drift in a westerly into that, because you could still infringe the Odium zone and actually not impact the Farnborough zone. Just a reminder, there's always lots of discussion about MATZs or MATs. Those are for military aircraft and do not apply to civilian aircraft, so are not being discussed in this session. New diagram now, which I produced. Soaring spots is really good for these sort of diagrams. To the south of us, CTA 8. So you can see where CTA 3 and 6 are here. And you can see Golden Pots around there, and it goes into Alton. Now, unfortunately, when they designed CTA 8, it did not follow really a particular good line. It happens to go just past my house in Medstead, but other than that, if you don't know where that is, you won't have much of a clue. So the best way to think of it is it sort of follows the A31, which you can see here, but about 3 or 4 miles north. Up in this corner here, there is a new housing estate. It's just finishing off building, which marks the top of that. It goes through the top of Alton, past the Departure Lounge Cafe, where they've got the nice BAC 111, and there's a new Cold War museum in the building there too. Goes then through sort of the centre of Medstead, and then this is Alresford here. It joins the Solent zone, sort of in a field about 2-3 miles northeast of Alresford. If you've gone sort of, if there's a big pond, Alresford Pond, if you've sort of gone, if you're over the top of that, you've already infringed the solent zone. All of these zones are equally important. The solent zone is just as bad as you infringe it as Farnborough. So yeah, keeping an eye on this one, although we don't sort of talk about it so much, is just as important. So yeah, that's there, and you can see that lives over Alresford. Popham, as you can see up here, doesn't have an 80Z or anything. And Lasham, you can see the mats, which I said we're not going to talk about today. Soaring spot shows high intensity radio transmission areas, which again are not airspace, they're just advisory. But yeah, so good layout there. Again, it's easier probably once you've listened to this presentation that you actually just watch and stop the video at certain points on YouTube and have a look at the diagrams for yourself, or I can make them available in other means. But yeah, that is the zones. That's how it looks like on the charts. Yeah, it's quite busy on the charts, and that's why I'm not using it particularly much. But you can sort of see with the decluttering that I've done, the sort of those corners, there's Alresford and stuff, but the chart really is quite difficult to read, and there's lots of arrows, there's lots of things like that. The new chart, by the way, is due out at the end of March 2021, so it should be in the office hopefully Monday or Tuesday next week, ready for collection, and we will be selling them. They'll probably go quite quick, but we'll get some more in. But yeah, very, very busy on the charts, so spend a lot of time looking at it on your own at some point and try and link these diagrams, which I've tried to make more simple, to the messy ones, because yeah, there's a lot of data on there. So Lasham procedures for what we do now post airspace. There is a daily club flying Zoom briefing at 9 o'clock and then uploaded to YouTube. I'll double check what the consensus is going to be, but it is likely, at least for our purpose, at least for most of the year, we're going to keep it at 9 o'clock. I appreciate that a lot of people liked it at 9:30, but it just fits in with our tasks a little bit better for setting up for the day that we maybe have it at 9 o'clock. If you want to view it at 9:30, it's always on YouTube. So we've got that flexibility in now that we didn't have sort of 2 years ago. We may go back to briefings in the future in the Brown Elephants, but we'll always have a online presence, so that will never change. But certainly there's no change to that anytime soon, because even at least June 21st, and even then there's social distancing still a problem. Airspace files still available on the club websites. Detailed maps available for the club gliders, and I have a load in the office here as well. Right, okay, bear with me for this bit. This is the nitty-gritty legal information that I have to give you about the different classes of airspace. So, in Class D airspace, aircraft which are operating IFR, so operating under instrument flight rules, your jets, your long-distance stuff, some propeller planes which are nicely kitted out, are separated from each other. They are not, VFR airplanes, however, are not separated from each other. And though Farnborough do decide to separate IFR from VFR, when you are flying potentially within the airspace, you are visually having to sight an aeroplane that you're told about in the airspace. So yeah, separation is still really your responsibility. The controller will help you, but it's still your idea to look out of the cockpit. You obviously need to get a clearance to go into this type of airspace under any circumstance, and that needs to be arranged with Farnborough. I'm going to talk about that in the next section that we come on to. The main thing with this is the VMC minima, and now this has changed a couple of times over the last 18 months. A year ago, you would have heard me in this presentation say that there was a new VMC minima that was actually making things more restricted. I'm pleased to say one benefit, and there's not many, I'm not really an EASA leaving advocate, of having left the European Union has meant the UK is going back to the former VMC minima. Now, what does that mean? It means that if you are flying within the airspace below 3,000 feet and less than 140 knots, that all you need to be is clear of cloud in sight of the surface with an in-flight flight visibility of 5 kilometers. That will be in place from mid-May 2021 if you are below 3,000 feet. For now, and if you are above 3,000 feet, you need to be 1,000 foot vertically clear of clouds, 1.5 kilometers horizontally clear of clouds, with a flight visibility of 5 kilometers. Now that all sounds like there's a lot to juggle there. There is a caveat to this, and that's it's your own judgment. I put in there, judge carefully. The reason for that is it might be all too easy to go, oh yeah, that 300 or 400 foot above, it looks like 1,000 feet. Doesn't really work if you end up having a air prox or something doesn't see you, or even worse, collision. At the end of the day, we do need to respect the rules are in place for a reason so that people can see each other. It's generally quite unwise, even in Class G airspace, to do lots and lots of sort of flying in the wispies in the clouds very close to Lasham, just how busy we are. So really advise against that anyway. But yeah, 1,000 foot vertically, 1.5 kilometer horizontally, and 5 kilometers. That goes for all airspace usage in Class D up until May, where below 3,000 feet we'll get that exemption, clear of cloud inside the surface. You'll obviously need to always get a clearance via radio. There's no other way to do it in a glider. And you can give them a telephone call beforehand, but that doesn't really work in our circumstance. But yeah, that is Class D. Class E, which is to the south of us, is something slightly different. Class E is very new in the UK. Farnborough is the biggest sort of practical usage that it's ever had. Effectively, it's where they've tried to share the airspace a bit more equally. It isn't particularly very useful to gliders because most of us don't have transponders because they've notified it as a transponder mandatory zone, this Class C airspace. But for Class CTA 8 and 9, the ones to the south of us near Autumn, a different set of rules do apply. In there, the controllers still have to avoid the IFR and IFR aircraft bumping into each other, but they'll only tell the jets doing 250 knots that you are there. They might not even give a heading to the pilot unless he asks for it. So yeah, you should expect, if you do operate in the airspace of a transponder, to see faster aircraft in there. The transponder must be functional, and you must be altitude reporting as well as mode S with effectively that means you've got all your data and all the aircraft stuff is in there too, lots and lots of things. If you own a transponder, you'll know whether you've got that or not. If you don't have a transponder, don't fly in this airspace. You are still required to meet the VMC minima, and because all of this airspace for Farnborough is above 4,500 feet, 3,000 feet, you will need to remain 1,000 foot vertically clear of cloud again, 1.5k horizontally, with the flight distance, visibility flight distance of 5 kilometers. The difference is, if you do have a transponder, you can go into this airspace without a clearance because it does not require a clearance if you are operating VFR, if you are following these rules. Now, over the last year or so, I've had a few questions about, can a glider fly close to the cloud and claim to be IFR? My honest advice is do not do it. It can open a can of worms. You'll have to get headings, level restrictions. It really, really isn't worth it. If the cloud is low in that box, if it's only 5,000 feet, really, you should not be going into this box because, as you know, it's 4,500 feet. That is the start of CTA 8, and CTA 9 is a little bit higher. So this is really only useful, this airspace, on blue days or days of really high cloud base above sort of 6,500 feet or so. So yeah, don't try and operate IFR. It just isn't very clever. And you'll likely just get yourself tangled up and the controller won't be particularly pleased. So very easy to operate with a transponder. We'll come on to the rules in the next section of this video about how we would actually use it for pilots that would use it, because I've divided this video up into 2 bits. Things that everybody must know and things that qualified pilots, experienced pilots should probably know to help them. Non-transponder access is possible, very rare, I must add, but it requires a clearance from a controller, just like the Class D. So you'd have to speak to them and they'd have to give you a clearance into it. People have tried it, it's sort of worked, but it's not very reliable at the moment. they don't like the idea of a glider being in there that they can't see and then sending a jet through it, which I can sort of understand, but I wish we could be a bit more flexible with the airspace. Okay, this is sort of the same as before. As we come out of lockdown now, I mean, for those of you watching this video in the distant in the future, this is the 26th of March when this was filmed. And there's a lot of people going back to flying after many months break, etc. Hang on, we've got a question. Graham is asking, are we asking why non-transponder aircraft are not being admitted into Class C? Yes, I'll come on to that a bit later, but information responding to aircraft not being allowed into airspace, it's fed back to Colin and I, and we will have a chat. I've got a direct line to the managers at Farnborough and we will work it out. Their safety net and their safety cases, they shouldn't allow non-transponding aircraft in there. We're trying to challenge that, and of course we've got post-implementation review coming up. So yes, Graham, we are asking, but we don't always get an answer particularly quickly. But as I say, any issues with the airspace, come to Colin and I and we can investigate further. Okay, back to what we're doing here. In the event of infringement, please just own up. It's much easier, there'll be less problems. It's just hand yourself in. Way to do that, just come to Colin and I, we can have a look at your trace, and a couple of people did last year ask me to have a look at the trace and they didn't go in the airspace. We were really lucky to, I believe, have one maybe infringements of the Class E airspace. And yes, they shouldn't be doing 250 knots, Graham, because it's below flight level 100, although they keep saying no speed restrictions in certain parts. Yeah, but you should not be, in the event of infringements, you should not hide it, because if it does get hidden and somebody starts filing reports about gliders in there, then it doesn't help our case, and it certainly doesn't help your case if you get pulled by the police, not police, the CAA, because they might pull your license. They have a habit of doing that these days. Whilst if you report it to us, what we can do is we can submit some paperwork. They'll come back with a questionnaire. They'll ask you a few questions. They'll do a bit of investigation, and normally it's a slap on the wrist and maybe a bit like a speed awareness course with the Airspace and Safety Group. That's a good website as well to look at that sort of thing. But yeah, don't hide airspace infringements, because we won't hide them if we're asked about it. Okay. Right, okay, we're coming to the end of this section. For those experienced pilots in here, I appreciate this is teaching to suck eggs, but I've got to put it in there. Radio. First things first, all gliders should have their radios on while flying at Lasham. That just means we can get hold of you. You don't have to necessarily have it turned all the way up when you're sort of flying cross country, but the common thing is we get students that forget how to turn the radio on, or just expect it to come on with the electrics. On all of our radios, which are these Funkwork radios, it's by using this little button here. Just hold it down and it'll all come up on the screen. The volume you can see is here, and that changes. It's on the top here. A lot of instructors like to turn down the volume of the radio whilst they're flying because they can't hear the student talking. Need to somehow find a happy medium with that, because quite often we then find the gliders flying around and it's almost like the radio's off because they can't hear anything that we're asking them, like take it back to the hangar, or there's a thunderstorm or a jet coming, etc. Dual watch, this button here, very useful, because it means the radio can listen to two frequencies at once. Can only transmit on one, but it will listen to two at once. Because you've got on the top here the actual frequency which is in use. So 136935, as we see here, that's the one that you can currently transmit on or receive on, and it comes up, you can see here it says receiving. By clicking dual watch, this standby will change to DW, which means you could listen to both this one, which you can also transmit on, and you can also listen only to 123450. With that, you can, if two stations are talking at once, it will always go to the primary one on top. So you could have, like all the glider ones are set to have Lasham on the top and 2XL on the bottom. So if you're flying around and you go, oh, okay, there's a jet coming, right, click that on, and you can hear that what 2XL are doing and where the jet might end up. So very useful button there, DW, and it comes up on here. Frequency switchover is that one there, and it switches around the numbers. Question again. Colin, yes, I haven't got there yet, but I will be. The frequency change is on here. So the switch over just switches standby to actual, actual to standby. Let's make sure we haven't got any more questions at the moment. Keep putting in the chat if you've got anything else that we're trying to do. Frequency change to actually change what these numbers are. You can see this underline means that if you twist this dial here, you can change it 123, 124, 125, 122, whatever. Click that one there and it will move to the 4, and then you can change it 456, and then the last bit, the line will move over here and we'll change the last couple of digits, as all of these radios are 8.33 kilohertz. So that's a good useful crash course on how to use the radio. Make sure your microphone's in the right place, but yeah, make sure it's switched on, because we do find it's not at times. And yeah, speak to an instructor if you are not sure. Nav kits. The UDIs have done really well, actually. It's me who does all the updating and stuff. So if there's anything that you don't like, there's a problem, something, come and see me. I will get them fixed. Thanks to sort of NAB boys as well for helping us out when we've had serious issues with them. But I think that's limited to only one UDI, so that's been good. But yeah, you switch on the UDI, it will come up with this screen. It will normally start automatically, but if need be, click that. The on switch is on the side. Generally, they have to be plugged in to start, because the batteries are often quite flat after the day. And yes, just keep them plugged in. Right, this is how they're set up at the moment. We had a bit of a change over the winter, just because there were some features people didn't like. The Duo, I'm going to configure slightly differently, because it's obviously doing more cross-country stuff. But we've designed these with not cross-country soaring in mind, but actual sort of useful information and airspace in mind first. So first of all, we have at the top here, volume control. I've changed the volume so it's a little bit quieter, about 80% rather than 100%. But the airspace warnings are still very loud. The parameters are set so that you will only get a warning now if there's a clear reason, like you are 30 seconds away from actually having an infringement. Whilst in the past, many people had their UDIs set with warnings about matzes and gas venting sites and children's parties and etc. So we've made that a little bit more streamlined. So volume you can control from up here with touchscreen. Zoom is controlled on the top, and you can change it down here at the bottom as well. The airspace I've changed the colors of. It's quite difficult to get colors that contrast nicely, but purple is now class D, class E is yellow and is shaded, and class A is shaded red. 80s and 80Zs are sort of more blocked red. So yeah, fairly similar between 80Zs and class A, but you're not going to get a class A 80Z at all, so that's not too much to worry about. Other things you've got on screen, targets, which is just say which turn point it's going to, so most of the time it'll go towards Lasham. The distance from that, ground speed, so you can sort of see if the wind's affecting you, and the wind is displayed up here actually when it's actually working. AGL, for some reason this thought it was quite high, so that's saying it's 8,500 feet above ground level, and altitude feet 9,843. Put these in there because it can be quite useful if you do need to land out to have a rough guess of what the actual ground level is, but don't trust it completely, and neither trust that, because it's still GPS altitude, so it's better to have the altimeter set right as well. So yeah, don't fly within 10 foot of the airspace trying to use this, because you may still infringe. You can set the destination by hitting this D button here with the arrow in it, and menu and lots of other things are accessible there, but hopefully that's a bit easier. What else have I removed? In the club gliders, I've removed thermal assistant because it was making lots of noise. I've disabled a gear alarm, because for most of the gliders that's not actually an issue, because actually the clear navs are in the discus and the Duo has its own system. Triangle optimization was a big pain last year, and I've removed that. So just decluttering. If you find anything else you want decluttered, come and chat to me. It's very easy for me to get that done. And the good thing is you cannot save anything on here. The flight's save, but you cannot change the settings too much. And that's something we've done to make sure that people don't make the class E green and remove the odium ATZ or something like that. Okay, if you click the go to button, you can select a destination. So Lasham, as you can see here, we can click that and you can click go to, and you can pick lots of other term points. It's got the term point database in there. I get a lot of people asking me about task planning and stuff like that. Nab Boys did a really good video, which I put on the YouTube, on our Lasham members area, all about task planning and how to do that on UD. So have a look there. That's a really good thing to do. Thanks, Jake, for doing that. But yeah, click there and go to. Changing glider site. The polars are set to K13 across the fleet. Generally, that gives people the margin for the K21, the Grob and stuff like that. So obviously the Discus, as I said, don't have these in. The Duo is set up for Duo, but yeah, the Polar is set up for a K13, so you have some sort of chance that if you are trying to do a final glide calculation on one of these, that there's still some margin in there, not by much, but it just keeps you safe in that respect. But yeah, if you do get upset and you want to change the Polar because you're going to take the K21 for a 300 or take a K13 for a 500, as David and Nigel did, then you can go to menu, click settings, next Polar, and you can change and choose the glider. Shutting down via the menu, click yes or on the side, off button, and then click it off. Fairly simple. Don't leave them on all day because otherwise they drain the glider's battery. Turn them off once you've flown. So that is the end of part 1, mandatory knowledge for all pilots. I'm about to go on to part 2, which some of you might not find so interesting, but it's more for the experienced pilots that want to know what it's like to actually use the airspace and what we've learned. So everybody's more than welcome to stay, yeah, that's end of part 1. In 30 seconds time, we'll go on to part 2. Any questions so far on what I've spoken about? I appreciate there's a lot to take in, so you might need to watch the video again. Okay, nothing so far. That's the end of part 1 for those of you that are not qualified pilots yet. The next section is for experienced pilots. So this section is new. I've written it up over the last couple of days. Now, one thing to go into, which will come up at the end, is letters of agreement. Despite our best efforts at the moment, that has been kicked down the road multiple times. It is on the CAA's radar that that's happened. So we will make sure that we do get a letter of agreement at some point, but COVID, amongst other reasons, have been cited, which have meant we have yet not actually been able to sign one. We're still pushing quite hard and we're giving them lots of reminders, but it will happen at some point because they cannot keep the airspace without actually being able to give us an LOA. So yes, do not fret. But this section is going to be about qualified pilots and using the airspace as it stands. And the first thing I want people to think about is to keep realistic. It's very easy to sort of say, right, okay, well, let's go into the airspace and use every bit of it, and let's make our point heard, let's make our voice heard. But we need to keep realistic in what we're asking, because there's some things which are not particularly useful. Radio license is a must, and confident RT skills are vital. If you're going to do lots of cross country and you're going to want to fly the most ambitious tasks, you really need to have a radio license. And thank you to Chris and also the team from the BGA who are really doing a sterling job on that. Controllers, 99% of them want to help, and all the experiences I've had with using the airspace, they want to help and sort something out. You need to be prepared with what you're doing and know what you want to say. I apologise to teach you to suck eggs again, but please just make sure you're using good RT. I know Andy and a few others that have used the airspace give some really good RT, because if a pilot hears if the controller hears a really confident pilot, the controller's more happy to sort of let them play in the airspace. If you're sort of underconfident and you're not not getting the sort of the story and the gist of what's going on, they're more hesitant to maybe give you so much leeway. So yeah, be prepared and know what you want to say. Consider which runway Farnborough is on. Farnborough have 2 runways, 24, which is their westerly, and 06, which is their easterly. 06 means that the jets are being vectored just to the east of Lasham, just past between Alton and Farnham over Bentley, and are coming down generally from the north or south, either via Compton or Goodwood or somewhere like that. If they're on 06, that means there's lots of aircraft going past Lasham very, very quickly, and at the same sort of levels that gliders are generally flying at. So that means if you're wanting to transit through that bit of airspace, it's going to be more tricky. To give you an example, I took a K-21 through that bit of airspace 2 weeks ago, and I was non-transponder, and I had to get a clearance. I had to wait about 10 minutes, and then they let me through without a transponder through there. Really good, very nice of them, but I did have to wait because they had lots of traffic coming in, and they don't want that to get in the way. And I'm afraid that is how it's been set up, as much as we don't like it. Have a plan B. Not every transit will be possible. Obviously, if there is a problem, then speak to us, because we are regularly in contact with NATS, and also Lasham IFR traffic. Our jets do cause an issue as well, because there's they'll want to make sure that the gliders are not going to get in the way if they're soaring out to the east or something like that in the airspace. So yeah, best not to try and do it during a jet movement. But as I said, as infrequently as people are using the airspace, it doesn't really matter. But keep realistic, that's the main thing. Without the LOA, access to Class D is as follows. Useful frequencies. You have Farnborough radar zone frequency, 133440, which is where they will always handle people that are going into the zone. There's Lars West, which many of you will know, which is basically the local outside controlled airspace service provider. As useful as that is, gliders don't generally use it too much, but that is another frequency just in the memory book. But it's the zone frequency which is most useful, because the controller there is their job is entirely to deal with aircraft going in and out of the zone, and trying to make that match with all of the jets and anything else going in. And these 2 frequencies are sometimes what's called bandboxed, where they put the 2 frequencies under one controller so that he's looking after both, and you can hear both frequencies running at the same time. But in an ideal world, they're split. There's a controller looking after the zone. So if you want to go into the airspace, keep on the zone frequency and make your request as early as possible. So I made it when I went in a couple of weeks ago, sort of 5 minutes beforehand. Generally, it should be 10, but gliders are slow enough. When you ask for this, obviously using the phraseology that you've been taught, you may be asked for a maximum altitude and operating area you're requesting. Use the local features to help, or something like soaring 2 miles east of Farnham, or 2 miles west of 2 miles north of Alton, or something like that. Just something that gives the controller a ballpark figure to work with, because if you just say I'm over this field, they won't necessarily know where you are, especially if you don't have a transponder. Be realistic with how much height you need. Round here, just out to the east of us, they don't like issuing clearances above 4,000 feet, because they're trying to descend aircraft over the top of it. You might be able to get it, you might not. As I say, everything's open here to be attempted, but trying to soar at the same height and in the same place for half an hour on the end of runway 06 at Farnborough isn't going to work as much as we'd like it to. It didn't work when Farnborough didn't have the airspace, and is one of the reasons why airspace, unfortunately, was sort of dreamt up, was to avoid some of that, as much as we weren't the ones that were doing it, but that is a problem. So come up with a realistic idea, and the controller will try and help. Expect to be given a squawk fairly quickly if you have transponder. Say your non-transponder immediately on calling if you do not have a transponder. You'll be asked to read back the Farnborough Q&H, and you'd probably be given a service straight away, normally basic service, something like that. Before going to the airspace, you will need to, you should expect a full clearance to go in there. So there's a good bit of phraseology I've got in the communications video I did, but they will say ABC, Golf Alpha Bravo Charlie Delta, clear to enter Farnborough control zone, etc. If you hear those magic words, you know that you're able to go in once you've told them and read back that instruction, just basically reading what they've told you back. If there's no clearance, if they say remain out of side controlled airspace or delay or something like that, if you don't get that magic words cleared into controlled airspace, there's no transit. You cannot go in there. And as I say, if there are problems, come and speak to us. Transponder does increase the chance of entry, but it certainly does not stop people from going in there. I got in there with that transponder, but they might need you to give them a few more position reports while doing so. Final thing, I'm not going to go into much about air traffic control today, but you'll get something called a basic service, which is basically they know you're on the frequency outside controlled airspace, and a radar control service inside, which is effectively where they can point out aeroplanes and they can sort of tell you ish what to do. So that's Class D. Class E, as I spoke about earlier, first of all, we need to have a Mode S transponder with altitude reporting. I mentioned that earlier. Squawk 7000, because that's the VFR conspicuity code, which basically says I'm a VFR aircraft, not talking to anything. You don't have to talk to anybody in the Farnborough control zone, up to you. We're not going to mandate yes or no, but do not squawk anything else unless a controller tells you to, and never squawk 2000 near Class E. So you might have been cloud soaring in a glider going up in a cloud, and you've been squawking 2000 because you've gone into the cloud and you can't see anything. The controllers then know that you're in the cloud by hopefully having 2000 selected. If you have 2000 selected and you go into the Class E, then that's an infringement because IFR aircraft need a clearance into there. If you do happen to speak to Farnborough, then you may be wise to comply with any safe requests you have. That's all I need to say on that topic. And keep an eye out for traffic which you might not have seen, and especially in sort of the corner up in the box towards Alton. As I say, non-transponder aircraft can request a clearance to enter the airspace, but it's not common, and radar identification is likely required. But as I say, give it a try. If there's a problem, speak to us. We can chase it up. Get towards the end here now. Powered aircraft. That's a map of the zone. If you are flying a motor glider, tug, something like that, and you're not a glider, things are obviously maybe a little bit easier for you to get access to the airspace because you're zipping in and out. Again, call up in plenty of time. As with any controlled airspace, crossing at right angles to the actual departure and arrival lanes is best because it means you're in the way the least. You may have to briefly hold. I think I did six minutes holding it at Guildford once across here about a month into the airspace existing in the motorfolk, and expect to route via visual reporting points or close to them. Keep a good lookout when you're going past these reporting points as well, because they're good collision hotspots because everybody likes going past them. So you might go, let's say you've come from here for some reason, you might go hook to Alton or hook to Farnham Castle. I've done that before. But yeah, visual reporting points. That's how people enter generally the airspace if you're not a glider. You can request sort of, I want to go on track maybe to Fair Oaks near Woking. But again, it's the controllers are used to the sort of the routings across it that there is. Southampton has a very similar style. As I say, work continues on these. Certainly, I know it's been a bit of a bugbear for Colin and I. We would like to have come to you now with it, but the ball is not in our court on this. We have hit it across the fence, and it is with the people in charge at Farnborough. And I spoke to them last week, reminded them, and they said, "Oh yeah, we're going to get this started again." But I've heard that once or twice. So let's. I'll give them their dues. It's been a difficult time, but let's hopefully see a letter of agreement very, very soon, because it's just really important to our operation, because it will allow us to soar out to the east in a westerly, and a bit of error towing out to the east in a easterly. But yeah, I reckon these will exist at some point. But yeah, we will be ready. It will be a major thing to have these, because you will need to obviously have your radio switched on. We'll need to have procedures to clear the box. It will be there'll be quite a lot of rules on using them. But for anybody that's flown at Dunstable, then you know the procedures there and some of the other places. And that is it. Hopefully that wasn't too painful. I'll open the floor to questions now, or questions on the floor. And you can, I'll stop the recording as well. But yeah, that is the Farnborough Airspace presentation.
Thank you for watching. Hopefully you found that useful. If you have any questions, please ask one of the flying staff. If you're a student pilot, this briefing will need to be signed off in your training record.